My parents skipped my wedding because I married before my perfect sister. Now their perfect family image is finally crumbling. 9 months ago I married the love of my life. We'd been together for almost 5 years and everything about the day was meaningful, from the handwritten vows to the quiet garden ceremony under a late spring sun. But if you looked closely at the front row, you'd see 2 empty chairs. My parents never RSVP'd. They never called. They simply didn't come. To understand how we got here, you have to understand what growing up in my family was like. I was never really seen. Not in the way my younger sister Camilla was. From the moment she could walk and bat her lashes, she was the star of the show. Pageants, piano recitals, sports, ballet, everything she tried she excelled at. And every win was met with over-the-top celebrations. Banners in the living room, parties with extended family, bragging posts on Facebook. Her face was everywhere in our house, framed and praised. I was quieter. I was the bookworm. I loved computers, puzzles, and writing code. But when I won a district science fair or got accepted into an advanced STEM camp, the most I got was a passing good job from my dad and a reminder from my mom that Camilla had just made honor society. When I graduated college with a double major in computer science and applied mathematics, my parents barely mentioned it. That same year, Camilla landed a modeling contract with a skincare brand, and they threw a party with champagne and catering. Her first professional photo shoot still hangs in their living room, framed above the fireplace like a trophy. There's not a single photo of me in that room. At some point I stopped trying to compete. I tried everything they wanted, took dance classes, joined student council, even dipped my toe into modeling, something I hated and wasn't even good at. Never mattered. Camilla always had the spotlight. And if I ever voiced frustration, my mom would say, "You're just being sensitive." My dad? That's just how things are. Camilla is tall, lean, and effortlessly stylish. I'm shorter, Kavya, and have always struggled with weight. My mom never let me forget it. She signed me up for gym memberships I didn't want, pushed me into diet programs before I even hit puberty, and constantly compared me to my sister. "Camilla doesn't have those issues," she'd mutter while watching me eat. Chipped away at me for years. But in my mid-20s something changed. I stopped chasing their approval. I focused on my career, built a stable life, made new friends who appreciated me for who I was, not who I wasn't. And most importantly, I met Eric. He saw me. Really saw me. Not as Camilla's sister, not as someone who needed fixing. He loved my dry humor, the way I explained complicated systems like they were bedtime stories, and yes, even my body. He never once asked me to change a thing. He proposed one night while we were sitting on the couch in our pajamas, eating Thai food and watching a rerun of our favorite show. It was quiet, intimate, and perfect. I was glowing when I called my parents to tell them. But instead of excitement, there was silence. My mom finally asked, "Are you sure this is the right time? Maybe you should tone up a bit before you try on dresses." That should have been my first clue. They were cold at the engagement party. Barely mingled, spent most of the night huddled over my mom's phone. Eric later told me he overheard them talking to Camilla. He was crying. They were whispering about how this wasn't the plan, how they'd always expected Camilla to be the first to walk down the aisle. At that point, Camilla wasn't even engaged. That didn't stop my mom from acting like she was. She'd already created Pinterest boards full of wedding dresses, venues, and floral themes, all for my sister. She told me point blank that she wasn't interested in helping me plan anything. When I found the dress I loved, a simple A-line gown that made me feel elegant and radiant, she shrugged and said, "At least it's flattering." Luckily, Eric's mom was the opposite. She jumped in with both feet and helped with every detail. The flowers, the seating chart, even the personalized wedding favors. She treated me like a daughter from day one. I'll never forget the look on her face when I walked out of the fitting room in my gown. She cried. I made sure my parents got their invitations, both digital and printed. The digital invite even showed me that they'd opened it. But they never responded. I followed up with polite reminders, texts, emails. Their replies were vague, always busy, always checking the calendar. Eventually I stopped waiting. I had a wedding to plan. The day itself was beautiful. We kept it simple and sweet. A morning ceremony in a garden surrounded by flowers, followed by a brunch reception with jazz music and an espresso bar. Everyone laughed. People cried during the vows. Eric looked at me like I was the only person in the world. But when I looked toward the front row and saw those empty chairs, It was like someone pressed pause on everything. They chose not to be there. And I knew why. After the honeymoon, I called them one last time. My mother launched into a monologue about how hurt she was that they never got formal invitations. She claimed we must have sent them to an outdated address, even though they've lived in the same house since the 90s, and they confirmed receipt of other mail that same week. I didn't even argue. I just said, "I'm sorry you feel that way," and hung up. Later that night, Eric looked at me with the same calm clarity he always does and said, "You know they didn't want to come. It had nothing to do with an invitation. They just couldn't handle the fact that you got married first." And the sad part? He was right. But the story didn't end there. Because just a few weeks later, Camilla got engaged. And that's when things really started unraveling. Camilla got engaged to a man she'd been dating for just under a year. His name was Troy, and according to the family grapevine, he owned a high-end cocktail bar downtown and had some vague connection to the fashion industry. It didn't matter who he was, really. The point was Camilla was finally the one getting married. And my parents? They acted like the second coming of royalty. They called nearly every relative within 48 hours of the engagement, boasting that Camilla finally found someone worthy, and that the real family wedding is happening now. I wasn't even angry, just numb. Their reaction wasn't just excitement. It was a performance, a calculated display. My mom even posted a collage of Camilla's childhood photos with a caption that read, "From princess to queen, we're planning a day as special as she is." No such post existed for me. Camilla's wedding planning became a full-blown production. There was a 3-day bridal expo she flew to Paris for with my mom. A dress fitting at an exclusive atelier in the city. Custom-made invitations printed on velvet-textured paper with gold foil. My mom sent photos of everything to the family group chat. To be clear, I'm not even in that group chat. I only see what people forward me. Meanwhile, I stayed quiet. I didn't post about my wedding. I didn't talk about it unless someone asked. But people did ask, and they started asking more often once they found out my parents hadn't attended. A cousin I hadn't spoken to in years messaged me on Instagram, "Hey, is it true your parents didn't come to your wedding? I'm so sorry." I didn't give a dramatic response. Just said, "Yeah. They decided not to come." That was it. That's all I needed to say. The quiet started to shift. One by one, relatives who had always been close to my parents started pulling away. A few family members who had initially committed to helping with Camilla's big day began backing out. "Scheduling conflict," one uncle said. "Too much travel that month," said another. Then came the whispers. Apparently, during a brunch with extended family, someone casually mentioned how beautiful my wedding photos were, and my mother snapped. She launched into a bizarre defensive rant about how we weren't formally invited, and Rebecca never kept us in the loop. But the people listening knew better. Some of them had seen my invitation. Some of them had even helped with logistics after my parents backed out. What my parents didn't realize is that they were unraveling their own lie. Eric's sister heard about the meltdown at brunch and told me about it the next day. I was almost impressed. Even in the face of overwhelming facts, my mom still clung to the story that they'd somehow been left out. Left out of a wedding that I had begged them to attend. A wedding where their absence left a pair of empty chairs in the front row. Chairs I now wished I'd filled with strangers instead. But the cracks kept forming. A few family members pulled me aside at a baby shower a couple weeks later. They asked gently what had happened. I gave the same calm explanation I'd been giving. They said they were too busy. They just didn't show up. No embellishment. No guilt trips. And it worked. People started talking. My parents had built their reputation around being the gracious, supportive parents of Camilla. Now that narrative was showing signs of rot. And when Camilla's engagement party came around, half the RSVP list mysteriously dropped off. That's when my phone rang. It was my mother. Her tone wasn't sad or reflective. It was angry. Furious. She accused me of poisoning the family against Camilla and sabotaging her once-in-a-lifetime moment. I asked calmly, "What exactly do you think I've said?" She snapped back, "You've made us look like monsters. Everyone's pulling out. Camilla is heartbroken." I took a deep breath. "I've told people the truth. That you didn't come to my wedding. That you chose not to be involved. That's all." She said it was a lie. Claimed she wanted to help but I'd pushed her away. That she was never invited. that I'd twisted the narrative to make her look bad. I reminded her about the invites, the read receipts, the ignored follow-ups. I reminded her how I called, texted, and emailed, how I cried over the empty chairs, how I smiled through my reception while everyone whispered about where my parents were. There was a long pause, and then she doubled down. You're making it a competition. You're obsessed with being the victim. Why can't you be happy for your sister? That was the moment I realized, truly realized, that there was no reaching them. I didn't yell. I didn't argue. I just said, I hope Camilla has a beautiful wedding. But I'm not going to pretend this didn't happen. And I hung up. That night I told Eric everything. He wasn't surprised. He just pulled me close and said, you know, the people who matter were there. That's all that counts. He was right. But of course, the drama wasn't over yet. Because a few days later my sister got involved herself, and she made things so much worse. It started with a text. A long one. Camilla finally decided to get involved, and she came in swinging. Her message arrived one morning while I was drinking coffee and half scrolling through emails. It was one of those carefully crafted essays she's always been good at. Polished, self-righteous, and just subtle enough to sound concerned rather than cruel. It began with, what you said to Mom and Dad was completely out of line. She then proceeded to explain how I had taken things out of context and disrespected everything our parents have done for us. She reminded me that they sacrificed so much for our family and that I had no right to spread lies about them, just because you're upset that your wedding wasn't what you wanted. That part hit differently. She had no idea what my wedding was actually like. She wasn't there. She never asked. But that didn't stop her from twisting the knife. Camilla went on to write, I understand your insecurities and I know it must be difficult to watch someone else get the celebration you didn't have. But that's no excuse to try and ruin mine. Then she closed with a gem I'll never forget. Not everything has to be a competition, Rebecca. You had your chance. Let others have theirs. I didn't respond. Not because I didn't have things to say, I did. But I'd reached a point where I finally understood what silence could do. Responding would only give her more fuel. Camilla doesn't argue to resolve things. She argues to dominate, to win. So I blocked her number. It wasn't a dramatic decision. Just a quiet one, a line in the sand. I figured that would be the end of it. It wasn't. That same afternoon I got a call from Eric while I was at work. He was laughing so hard he could barely breathe. You are not going to believe this, he said. Camilla had tracked down his personal number and texted him directly. According to Eric, she must have gotten it through one of our distant relatives. Someone who thought they were helping the family reconcile. Her message to him started off painfully formal. As Rebecca's sister and someone deeply invested in our family's unity. But very quickly the mask slipped. She told him, in writing, that as Rebecca's husband he had a responsibility to guide her into making better decisions, because clearly I was too emotional to see things clearly. She implied that my overreaction was harming the family and that he should intervene before things got worse. Then came the best part. She actually wrote, surely you understand the value of staying on good terms with successful people in the family. Relationships are everything. Rebecca's current attitude could seriously limit her long-term opportunities. Eric couldn't stop laughing when he read that part out loud. His response was perfect. He texted back, thank you for your concern about Rebecca's well-being. As her husband, my job is to support her happiness, not manage her behavior. I suggest you take future concerns directly to her. Have a good day. She sent one last message after that. I see she's poisoned you against us too. Don't say I didn't try to help. And that was it. Camilla tried to manipulate my husband the same way she tried to manipulate everyone else. But Eric isn't easily impressed by titles or fake status. He saw through her instantly. That night we read through her texts again, this time with wine and popcorn. We laughed not because any of it was funny, but because it was absurd. A grown woman trying to play social chess, unaware that we'd both stopped playing years ago. Seeing her attempts crash and burn wasn't just satisfying. It was freeing. Because for the first time in a very long time I wasn't the one on the defensive. I wasn't trying to prove anything. I wasn't begging for understanding. I was simply existing, peacefully, truthfully, while the people who had spent years manipulating the narrative were now unraveling it all on their own. Camilla, for all her poise and accomplishments, still hadn't outgrown her need to control the story. She was the same girl who used to tell my friends that I talked behind their backs when she was jealous of my friendships. The same girl who told our parents I cheated on a quiz just so they wouldn't let me go to a school dance. Different decade, same tricks. The difference was me. 10 years ago I would have cried. 5 years ago I would have argued. Well, I just laughed. The next morning I woke up to a group email from my mom, sent to several family members. It was clearly damage control. She was clarifying the situation, saying there had been a misunderstanding about the wedding invitations and that everyone should refrain from judging others based on incomplete information. I didn't reply. I didn't need to. Because by then the tide had already turned. Relatives had started talking. Stories were lining up. Everyone could see what was happening even if my parents and sister refused to admit it. And quietly people started choosing sides. 3 days after Camilla's failed attempt to guilt-trip my husband, the situation escalated in a way none of us expected. My parents began what I can only describe as a full-blown PR campaign. Apparently realizing that family members were withdrawing from Camilla's wedding plans, and not buying their "we were excluded" excuse, they went into damage control mode. They started calling relatives one by one, some of whom I hadn't even spoken to in years. My Aunt Sylvia, who lives in Arizona and barely talks to anyone, texted me. "Your mom just called and told me you never invited them to your wedding. Is that true? I remember getting your invite myself." I told her the truth. They were invited. Both digital and printed. They just didn't come. And one by one people started confirming the pattern. My cousin Ray said my dad called him to set the record straight, claiming that I'd purposely sent invitations to an old address and an outdated email account. The funny thing is, my parents still live in the same house they've had since I was 12, and their email address hasn't changed since AOL was a thing. They weren't lying out of confusion. They were lying out of panic. And it wasn't working. The best part? Several family members had already seen the receipts. My wedding planner had sent backup emails, my aunt had taken screenshots of her RSVP confirmation, and Eric's mom, bless her organized soul, had created a spreadsheet of everything, including delivery confirmations for the invites. But the biggest shift came when my father's brother, Uncle Dave, finally spoke up. He had always been quiet, always the one who stayed out of family drama. But this time he called me himself. He said he remembered how they treated me growing up. How Camilla's birthday parties were catered events, while mine were boxed cake at home. How my college graduation was a rushed dinner at Olive Garden, while Camilla's was a private party at a country club. "I should have said something sooner," he told me. "I just didn't want to rock the boat. But watching how they treated your wedding, it broke something in me." He said he wouldn't be attending Camilla's wedding. Neither would his wife or his kids. Not out of spite but out of principle. That broke the dam. Other family members followed. Quiet withdrawals from wedding planning groups. Last-minute conflicts that canceled dress fittings and meetings. A cousin who was supposed to design the floral arrangements suddenly lost the contract due to scheduling. And the most poetic justice of all? A family friend who owned a boutique bridal shop, and who had initially offered Camilla a deep discount on her dress, withdrew her support, citing a professional boundary she had to maintain. My parents tried to blame me for everything. They started sending me text after text full of accusations. "You've turned the family against us. You're ruining your sister's future. You're jealous because her wedding is going to be more beautiful than yours ever was." I didn't answer. Because here's what they didn't understand. I wasn't doing anything. I wasn't calling people. I wasn't complaining. I was simply being honest when asked. The truth was doing all the heavy lifting. But the breaking point came at a family cookout, one of the last neutral events before the real divide took hold. Someone innocently asked to see my wedding photos. I didn't even hear the conversation. I was outside helping grill. But according to half the backyard, my mother overheard the request and completely snapped. She stood up, drink in hand, and launched into a tirade about how I changed after the wedding, how I was trying to destroy this family, and how I'd always been bitter about Camilla being the star. She didn't realize she was surrounded by half a dozen people who had heard from me privately. People who knew the truth. People who had seen the tears I tried to hide when I danced alone at my wedding reception, because my parents weren't there to take part in it. Her tantrum was the final blow. One of my cousins later said, "I'd never seen her lose control like that. It was like she couldn't believe people weren't taking her side. After the cookout, several relatives told me they were fully done with the drama. That they were no longer attending Camilla's wedding. That they were tired of pretending everything was fine when it so clearly wasn't. Ironically, all the things my parents did to preserve their image were the same things that destroyed it. Every time they tried to defend their absence, they made it worse. Every lie exposed another crack. Every call they made turned someone else against them. The harder they fought to control the narrative, the more people stopped believing it. And I just kept living my life. No revenge. No campaigns. No effort to expose them. The truth was enough. My silence spoke louder than their spin ever could. Eric said it best one night while we were watching a movie and I was still trying to make sense of everything. They built a perfect family brand around Camilla, he said. But it was all smoke. And smoke can't hold weight forever. He was right. And the craziest part? I didn't even feel hurt anymore. Just detached. Free. Because when you stop chasing people who don't value you, something amazing happens. You find peace. After the cookout meltdown, the silence from my parents was deafening. No follow-up. No apology. No surprise visits. Just nothing. At first, I expected some kind of response. A lecture. A guilt trip. A half-baked attempt at reconciliation. But it didn't come. It was almost like they'd entered a state of denial, where they pretended none of it ever happened. Or worse, where I never existed. Camilla, however, was another story. She didn't go quiet. She went calculated. A week after the cookout, Eric received yet another message from her. This time shorter and more aggressive. It said, "I see she's managed to poison you too. Don't say I didn't try to help when this all blows up in your faces." He didn't even respond. We just looked at each other and shook our heads. If that was her idea of help, then she needed serious therapy. But something else happened that weekend. Something that finally shifted how I viewed everything. We were invited to dinner at Eric's parents' house. Nothing fancy. Just grilled food, backyard lights, and soft jazz playing through the outdoor speakers. After dessert, his mom hugged me tightly and said, "You're doing great. You really are. They don't get to define your happiness." It hit me harder than I expected. Because in that one sentence she gave me something my own parents never could. Validation without conditions. I excused myself to the bathroom and cried quietly for 5 minutes. Not because I was sad, but because for the first time I realized I didn't need my parents' approval anymore. I already had everything I thought I'd been chasing. Love, stability, kindness. I didn't need to earn it. I just had it. That night, sitting on the porch with Eric, I finally said the thing I'd been holding inside. "They're never going to change, are they?" He didn't try to soften it. He just squeezed my hand and said, "No. But you did." And that's what mattered. I had changed. The girl who once begged for their attention was gone. The woman sitting in her place had a real marriage, a calm mind, and a future she was building on her own terms. Camilla's wedding was still weeks away, but the family split was already clear. Group chats had splintered. Invitations were quietly declined. Vendors were suddenly unavailable. My parents were working overtime trying to fix it, but nothing stuck. You can't force people to care, especially not when they've seen the truth with their own eyes. Then one more twist. A few family members shared stories I had never heard before. Little moments from my childhood that painted a clearer picture. One aunt told me about the time I won a junior coding competition in middle school and my parents skipped the award ceremony because Camilla had a modeling shoot the same day. Another cousin reminded me how my mother once made a public speech at Camilla's birthday party, in front of 40 guests, praising her grace, beauty, and potential, and said absolutely nothing about me, even though my birthday had been just 3 days earlier. I had pushed so many of those memories down, buried them beneath years of trying to keep the peace. But now I didn't need to keep anything. Now I had peace. Even family friends, people not related to us at all, started withdrawing from Camilla's wedding planning. One florist dropped out due to ethical reasons. A family friend who had offered to film the event suddenly cited creative differences. When I asked one of them privately why they backed out, they said, "We just don't want to be part of something that doesn't feel right." And I didn't have to lift a finger. The truth was doing everything for me. In the midst of it all, I decided to do something symbolic. I went through our wedding album with Eric and pulled out one photo. Just one. It was of us dancing under string lights, mid-laugh, surrounded by people who actually wanted to be there. I printed it, framed it, and hung it in our hallway, right across from the front door. A photo of a real moment, unpolished but true. And unlike the staged portraits of Camilla that lined my parents' living room, this one didn't need approval or praise. It just existed. Like our love. Like our life. It was enough. My parents didn't say anything about the mass dropout. Not to me. Not publicly. But they kept trying to save face. My mom posted photos from a pre-wedding spa day, with Camilla, full of forced smiles and filtered lighting. My dad shared a Facebook memory from a family trip in 2010, conveniently cropped to exclude me. It was all falling apart, and still they refused to look inward. Because for people like them, the illusion of perfection matters more than the truth behind it. They hadn't just skipped my wedding. They'd erased my presence, my place in the family, my value. But in doing that, they made space for me to build something far more honest, a real life. And that, I realized, was the one thing they couldn't control. Camilla's wedding was yesterday. We didn't go. We weren't invited, not that we would have gone if we had been. By the time the date arrived, the event had shrunk considerably. What was originally planned as a 200-person luxury affair became a tight, curated guest list. Several venues had pulled out. So did a few vendors. And despite the exclusive and intimate branding my parents tried to push on social media, everyone could read between the lines. It wasn't exclusivity. It was damage control. Eric and I spent the weekend in a cozy cabin outside the city. No phones. No drama. Just a fireplace, a bottle of wine, and the quiet kind of joy that doesn't need to be performed for anyone. We didn't talk about the wedding. We didn't need to. Because we were already living what they were so desperately trying to fake. And while I don't feel sorry for how things turned out, I do feel something. Not regret. Not bitterness. Just a deep sadness for what could have been. I didn't want things to end like this. I didn't want the kind of life where I had to protect myself from my own parents. But the older I get, the more I understand that some people love the idea of family more than they love the people in it. They'll bend over backwards to protect a version of the family that only works if everyone plays their part. Even if that means one daughter has to be invisible for the other to shine. For a long time I was that invisible daughter. Not anymore. What shocked me most over the past few weeks wasn't my parents' behavior. That was predictable. What surprised me was how many people saw it. How many cousins and aunts and even old family friends reached out, apologized, and quietly took my side just by choosing not to participate in the performance anymore. Some even sent handwritten notes. One from my mom's college roommate said, "You deserved better. I always knew it." Another from a cousin in Oregon simply read, "I'm proud of you." Those little messages meant more than I can explain. They reminded me that truth doesn't need to shout. It doesn't need a stage. It just needs time. And eventually it cuts through. My parents haven't reached out since Camilla's wedding. I doubt they will, not unless they feel the narrative slipping again. And honestly, I don't care. I don't need an apology. I don't need a reconciliation. I need peace. And I have it. Eric and I are focused on building our own traditions now. Holidays with friends who feel like siblings. Birthdays filled with people who actually show up. Dinners where no one's keeping score or checking Instagram followers or measuring worth in appearances. Camilla might still believe she won. That she had the better wedding, the better support, the better love. But deep down I think she knows. Because people like her, people who measure everything by how they're seen, are always terrified of losing the audience. They can't stand the idea that someone might walk away and find happiness elsewhere. Especially when that someone used to orbit around their world. That's what I did. And I don't regret a second of it. I'm not angry anymore. Not even disappointed. Just free. Free from trying to make my mother proud. Free from comparing myself to a sister who was always set up to win. Free from carrying the emotional debt of people who never saw me as enough. I've started journaling again. Coding side projects for fun. Planning small getaways with Eric. And next month we're adopting a rescue dog. Something I always wanted but never made time for. That empty space where my parents' approval used to live? It's full now. Not with replacements but with something real. Something earned. Something mine. I used to think closure came from reconciliation. From fixing what was broken. Now I understand. Sometimes, closure is just giving yourself permission to stop waiting. I don't know what will happen with my family in the years to come. Maybe there will be some half-hearted attempt to reconnect, maybe not. But for the first time I won't be the one chasing it. Because the truth is, and always has been, enough. This time I let it speak for itself.